Hi, my name is Michael Rhodes, and today I'm talking about the metaphysics of nature. Metaphysics means beyond the physical. And when we look at a tree, we think that that is the tree, there's nothing more. But the tree you actually see is like looking into a mirror. As we look into the mirror, we see a reflection of our physical body. It's actually a two-dimensional reflection of a three-dimensional body. And when we're out in nature and we look at a tree, we're seeing a physical reflection of a greater metaphysical reality. So the metaphysical tree is incredible. It has, just as our metaphysical self is something far greater and far more complex and capable than our physical body, so it is with a tree. Now this gets to be interesting, because if you cut a tree down, what happens to the metaphysical? So you can only cut the physical body of a tree down. Now let me tell you a little story. I used to once rent a home, quite a long time ago now, but I left a community that we created, and we were in a part of our life where we're in suspension between what we were going to do and what we had been doing. And so we lived in I guess it would be an early type house in Australia, a wooden house, not a bush house, but one of the early sort of settlers' homes. Wood, built well up off the ground, and all timber, and the joists in the walls were twice as close, 3 times as close as they are today. A lot of timber. And I lived there for 6 years. Now I used to walk from the lounge through the doorway into the kitchen, and from the kitchen through the doorway back into the lounge. There was no door on that doorway, so there was no reason for me to do this. But always when I walked from the lounge to go into the kitchen, so regularly I'd hit the outside edge of my elbow. And gradually and I didn't really register it. You know, I was living subconsciously. I wasn't conscious. I was on my path toward being more conscious, but I was living subconsciously. And gradually I noticed that the outer edge of my elbow was getting more and more painful. And one day I went to a holistic doctor and I said, I've got my elbow, it's all pain. I can't touch it now, I tap it. And I said, it's really bad. I don't know what to do. And he said to me, well, whatever you're doing, stop doing it. I said, I'm not doing anything. He said, you have to be. This is not just happening. Because he said, the best I can see, you've bruised the bone, and the bone is being bruised regularly. I said, but that's stupid, I wouldn't do that. I went home, walked from the lounge into the kitchen, and hit it on the way. I thought, oh my God. And as I hit it and was conscious of it, I realized, oh my God, I keep doing this. Every week or two, I hit this bone. And I couldn't understand why. The doorway was, why? Why would I keep walking through and clipping this bone? I didn't know about the metaphysics of nature. So one day everybody was gone, and I'm sitting in the lounge, at the back of the lounge on a big settee, and I was putting myself into an altered state because I wanted to take a journey into nature. And as I moved into an altered state, to my astonishment, right in front of me, standing just in front of the doorway that led from the lounge to the into the kitchen, was a cedar tree. And I stared at it, this cedar tree, this huge trunk of a cedar tree, and I'm staring at it, and I sort of blinked my eyes and stared back and gave myself woke myself up, and it wasn't there. And I moved back into an altered state, and there it was. And it suddenly occurred to me, there must have been a cedar tree. This is the red Australian cedar, and called it red cedar, and it was actually Tuna australis, not the cedar of America. And so this had, it clearly to me, there'd been one growing there. And because I was moving more and more, I was practicing a lot of metaphysical work, so my metaphysical self was growing stronger, and so metaphysically I could see the tree, and so I tried to move past the tree and through the doorway in a semi-subconscious state. So physically I can't see it, metaphysically I can. I'm subconscious, but metaphysically I go to avoid the tree because I didn't want to walk into it, so I'd keep walking into the door jamb and hurting this. And so I thought, oh my gosh, there's a cedar tree here. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And so I went to see the owner of this house because I was renting it, and he was an old bushman. And I said to him, Lance, I said, you know where your house is? I said, was there ever a cedar tree growing there? He said, a cedar tree? He said, well, it was there when I went there. But he said, let me think about them. He'd have made a good detective. You put a question like that to him and he had to find the answer. And so 2 weeks later he said, I've been thinking about what you said. He said, yes, he said. He said, as you go from the lounge into the kitchen, just before that doorway, he said, there used to be a cedar stump in the ground. He said, and one day I was looking under there, he said, and it was full of white ants. And he said, you know, white ants, he said, termites, we don't want them. So he said, I got an old tractor and with another guy, we hooked it and pulled it out. He said, that was an old cedar stump. So he said, yes, there was a tree right where you walk from the lounge into the kitchen. He said, why? I said, oh, I just wondered. I wasn't prepared at that stage to tell him, but I kept, as I tried to miss walking into it, I kept walking into the doorway because I rather wanted to stay in that house for a long way rather than having turfed me out for a lunatic. And so I began to realize that you can take away the physical, but the metaphysical will stay there until its own time comes for it to pull its energy away. And in Tasmania, I was there when the wood chipping was on. And I saw forests cut down and devastated physically, a physical ruin, disgusting that any human consciousness could create such ruin and rape of a forest and the land. And it attracted in negative astral entities. And that was not nice if you went and looked at it on a metaphysical level. But equally, metaphysically, every tree was there. And I took some journeys back to look at those forests. And if I went and I tried it deliberately, negative, angry and aggressive, I saw the negative energies and the devastation. If I went back there loving the forest and just focused on positive and loving and on beauty, I saw the metaphysical forest standing there with none of those negative entities or energies. You might say, well, which was true? And that's where we come in, because we are creators. And so the truth is, whichever state of consciousness I was in, I created that reality. So both coexisted. I saw which fitted my framework of consciousness at the time. I did a lot of such experiments. And so metaphysically, the world of nature is a metaphysical world. I've written a whole book on this, Entering the Secret World of Nature. 50 years of my experience has gone into that. And most people, for instance, have a relationship with nature that is entirely physical. Yes, it's very nice to hug trees, but there's really only 2 or 3 ways you can do it. If you're very shy, you can hug a tree and make sure nobody's looking because they think you're a bit loony, or you don't care what people think and you hug a tree, and that's nice. The tree likes it and you will like it, particularly if you happen to be conscious, and that's always a good idea. And then there's a high impact approach. You're on a motorbike and you hit the tree at about 100 kilometers an hour and you really make an impression on the tree. You really get close, up close and very personal. But when they scrape you all off, you probably don't even remember your encounter with the tree. And so they all have their place, but when you embrace a tree, knowing that the tree is not outside of self, so when you sit beneath the tree and you let go of your sense of identity and you move into your metaphysical body and you simply embrace the tree in the light of self, or you walk into the tree, then you can have a tremendous experience, an experience of a tree that you couldn't have in any other way. But one of the difficulties of this is people like to listen. They want to listen to nature. So let me be clear about this. Nature communicates with us. It doesn't have a choice, because everything physical is energy. You know, everything on this earth, the whole world, it's all energy. Everything that is physical is energy. All energy has consciousness, and all energy communicates. It's full of information, and it's communicating that information all the time. A tree is all the time conveying the information of its growth, the information of its in the moment experience. It's just pouring out of it as a stream of energy of which you can become part of. But when we see the tree there and I'm here, and the tree and I are separate, that's ended. But then to close up that gap, we can listen. So we had a river flowed past that house that I talked about, where the red cedar was that wasn't there. And so I would go down to the river and I would listen, because I knew rivers communicate very powerfully. And I would sit every day for 5 days. Pretty well most days I would go down there an hour, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 hours, 5 hours. It depended entirely on the day. But one thing I was totally committed. I would learn to listen to nature. I would learn to listen. I would hear sounds. I'd hear traffic on the road going by, people laughing, crows cawing. I could hear the bubbling river chuckling as it went by. I could hear tractors in the distance. Sound. So much sound that I didn't want to listen to. I wanted to listen to the river. And after about nearly 5 years, pretty well in the 5th year, I was in the 5th year, and gradually there was a breakthrough and I began to learn to listen. In that process, I learned so many things. So many things I learned in just listening to a river. I learned about my relationship with the river. I learned about my relationship with myself. I learned about that I wanted newness, and where I had an old relationship with myself. There was so much. I could keep going on and on and on about this. But finally I listened to the river, and the river then for many years became my teacher. And I would sit down by the river and let myself go, and the river would communicate with me. It will communicate with anybody. It's not picking me out. I single myself out by learning to listen. And so you might say, well, what's love got to do with this? Only everything. Because if you don't have any motive of listening to nature, it's probably not going to happen. But if you happen to love nature, and you happen to love yourself, and you want to make a connection, a love connection with all life, then you learn to listen to nature. And I've written about this in my book. And then once again, as always, it helps if you consciously choose love.